This episode is sponsored by Audible. Find books recommended in this episode like Watership Down, The 13 Clocks, and The Wonderful O. Listen with your kids in the car, or use these high-quality audiobooks to do the reading for you when you need a break. Get a free audiobook at audibletrial.com/readaloud. You're listening to the Read Aloud Revival podcast. This is the podcast that inspires you to build your family culture around books. You've got episode 10 of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before we start in with today's episode, I want to give you a heads up that I am currently running a survey about the podcast. I want to know what you've enjoyed so far, what's been the most helpful, and the kinds of podcasts you like best that inspire you to read aloud more to your kids. The survey can be found at readaloudrevival.com. And if you head there and take it before September 15th, 2014, you can enter to win a $50 Amazon gift card. I really appreciate you taking 5 or 10 minutes to let me know what you think. So that's my way of saying thank you. Again, that survey is at readaloudrevival.com. Today I'm talking with Heidi Scovel, mother of 4 and blogger at Mount Hope Academy. On episode 3 of the Read Aloud Revival podcast, Tish Oxenreider told us that one of her favorite places to go for great book recommendations is Heidi's blog, which can be found at mounthopeacademy.blogspot.com. I'll link it up in the show notes, of course. I've been a longtime reader of Heidi's blog as well and can attest to her excellent taste in books. I thought it would be fun to chat with Heidi about how she chooses books and how she encourages the reading culture in her home. Hey, Heidi.
Hi, Sarah.
Thank you so much for taking my call. It's really fun to talk to you in person. I've read you for so long.
Oh, I'm so excited to get to chat today. And books, my favorite subject.
Awesome. Well, can we start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Absolutely. My husband, Russ, and I have been married for 18 years, and we have 3 boys. They're 12, 10, and almost 8. And then we have a daughter also. She's 3.5. And we've been homeschooling from the very beginning. That's something that we talked about when we were dating, so that was something that we were really excited to do with our kids.
Wow,
and
really? You talked about it when you were dating? That's so impressive.
Actually, I think it was on our 3rd date because he was a public school teacher at the time, and I thought maybe I should let him know that I was planning on homeschooling my kids.
Yeah.
And so that he wasn't going to waste his time, and I let him know that I was planning on homeschooling my kids, and he said, I think that is a fantastic idea.
Wow,
and
that's awesome.
He's been on board ever since, so I really appreciated that.
Were you homeschooled or no?
I did a little bit of everything. I did public school, I did private school, and I homeschooled for 1 year during high school.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you had like
And
the
that was
gamut
kind
to
of-
choose from. You had a whole, treasure box of experiences to pick from before you took that.
Exactly. I felt like I really could make that decision knowing what each one looked like.
Cool. Yeah.
And of course, we still leave it open depending on the personalities and the needs of our own kids, but so far it's been great for us.
Awesome.
So, and I've been blogging for 7.5 years. I can't believe it's been that long, but
Wow. Yeah.
And that's our exciting life. We read, the boys swim, and I blog.
Awesome.
And take pictures.
And take beautiful pictures. Your photography is always gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
Well, you are often sharing fantastic books in your blog. A lot of people say your blog is their favorite place for book recommendations. Tish, of course, did on our podcast on the 3rd episode. A lot of times, if I'm struggling to come up with a book about a certain topic or just need some good recommendations, I'll head over to your blog to mine your archives for some good ideas. So have you always been good at choosing books, or is that something you've kind of grown into?
Well, I think I got the bug from my mom back when I was in 2nd grade. My school teacher actually recommended Honey for a Child's Heart to my mom. And so she purchased the book, and she started scouring the used bookstores in search of books on the list.
I love that book.
I know, it's so wonderful.
Yeah.
And so we started our home library that way. And I started my own personal book collection soon after that. And I remember it must have been middle school or maybe early high school. And my dad built each of us, my two sisters and me, he built large custom wooden bookcases for each of our rooms. And I still have the bookcase that he made me. It's in my boys' room. But I started collecting books and adding to my shelves. And when I got married, I started collecting little kids' books and picture books. And before I was even pregnant with my oldest son, I read The Well-Trained Mind. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that seriously enabled my book buying habit. And it was bad.
Like it needed enabling, right?
Exactly. And so that bookcase started overflowing, and then I had to purchase several more, and now those are overflowing. And so I've always loved book lists.
That's so great. When I was first a mother, I remember taking my toddler to the library, and I didn't even know where to start. I felt like I'm sure there are some books in here that are better than others, but I don't know how to pick. So I feel like it's something I've had to learn along the way. I'm much, much better at it now than I was at the beginning. But really, seriously, what a gift your mom gave you by giving you that skill early on.
Well, the interesting thing is that I didn't like going to the library when my oldest was little.
Oh, really?
Because it was the same thing. It was just shelves and shelves of books, and they were kind of hard to look at because they were stacked close to each other. And I much preferred having a list and searching on Amazon and researching things ahead of time. Mm-hmm. But I didn't enjoy the library when my kids were really little.
Well, it puts all the books on an equal plane. And, we know that not all books are equal to each other. So it feels...
Right.
Yeah.
It felt more like I was wading through so much to get to the few books that I enjoyed, where if I started with a list, I felt like everything on the list was wonderful, and I could go from there. But even now, I tend to put books on hold at the library online.
Okay, yep.
So I'll do my searching at home and on lists and on Amazon, and I'll go online to the library and put books on hold, and then I just go in, grab all of the hold books off the shelf, and we're good to go.
Yeah, that's good. My kids tend to pull the twaddle off the shelves. Well, actually, I think on our library shelves, probably 80% of everything in the kids department is pretty twaddly. So yes. It's almost hard. I don't really blame them, because it's like, how do you find the really good stuff when so much of it is garbage? But Jamie Martin from Simple Homeschool, I'll have to find the post, but she wrote a post a couple years ago on why she doesn't take her kids to the library. And it was basically that same principle, that she does much better if she puts books on hold online and then goes in and picks them up. And that way you can borrow all the best stuff without being distracted or having your little kids have to wade through, all the fluff to get to good stuff.
Right. I specifically remember that post of hers, too, and I thought, I can so relate to that, because I didn't want to be constantly telling my kids, no, not that one. No, not that one. No, I don't like that. And especially since I have my older son in particular gravitates towards fantasy.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Which is, to me, even more difficult to wade through.
Right.
That genre. And so I didn't want to be constantly telling him no, where if I bring home a huge stack of books, or we have books overflowing off our shelves, I feel like it's a constant yes.
Yeah, right.
Take your pick. Here's a huge feast spread in front of you, and you can pick what looks good to you.
Well, that's interesting. It also reminds me of something Andrew Pudewa said on the very first episode of our podcast, and I'm going to forget the analogy now. But basically, the idea was, if you give your children good stuff constantly, good stories, good books, constantly, their ability to recognize good books is so much stronger. It's like a muscle memory kind of thing. And so They don't really need to wade through the junk. You can do that for them, and then that kind of helps train their affections so that they are able to pull the good stuff for themselves as they get older. So
I think that's true, and I'm not saying that my kids don't sometimes pick out the very twaddly sort of books, and but I hope that in general the majority of what they're reading is compelling, good stories that have quirky characters and great themes that are well written, and that they do get used to that and find that the twaddle books aren't quite as satisfying.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though they're okay once in a while, because I'm guilty of that too. Sometimes I just want a really entertaining, easy book to get through, but I don't want a steady diet of that. And I hope that they grow up feeling the same way.
Yeah, exactly. So what criteria do you use when you're selecting books for your kids? Do you have certain things you're looking for in a good book?
I like books that are well written, and I like books that have interesting characters. I really like deep, unique characters for the books, and adventurous. I have 3 boys, and so I'm constantly trying to find books that I think will appeal to them. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think. There aren't really specific qualities that I look for. And there's a difference between read aloud books and books read independently. There's a few books that are really great for independent reading that don't flow as well for read aloud.
Yes, definitely.
And so that changes a little bit. I remember reading aloud Swallows and Amazons. I don't know if you've read that before, but it's a fantastic series, and my son has gone on to reread it several times. Uh-huh. But there was so much technical sailing, because they were kids going off on a sailing adventure, but there were so many sailing terms and technical explanations for what they were doing that it was difficult to read that out loud.
That's actually really helpful to hear you say that. I tried reading aloud Swallows and Amazons, must have been 2 years ago, and I really struggled through the whole first chapter. And it was the technical terms that was really tripping me up. So we just sort of put them aside, but at the time I didn't realize it. I had heard so many places on so many blogs, and so many people that I looked up to said, this is fantastic. This is a fantastic series, life-changing, sort of childhood-forming fiction.
Right.
And I thought, what is wrong with us? But really the thing, it wasn't anything wrong with us. It was just not a good selection for read aloud, but excellent for read alone. So,
and I think that's really true, because my oldest son has enjoyed the adventures that they went on, and that the ideas that the childhood that captures in the books, but it was difficult to read aloud. But I feel that way about the Phantom Tollbooth, because a lot of people say that's one of their favorite read alouds, and I think the book is full of homophones. If you can't see how it's written, it's not funny.
Right.
Because they're using words in different ways, but you can't tell when you're reading it aloud how things are spelled, and you lose a lot of the humor there.
Yeah, right. So what does read aloud look like in your house? And I know your kids read just voraciously independently. So can you give us a little picture of like how often you read aloud, or what the ratio might look like for, reading alone versus reading aloud in your home?
Right. And this is where I hope that I can express some reality for the parents who are struggling with read aloud time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because we have struggled with that. Even though I am completely on board with the idea of reading aloud and reading aloud to older kids, even once they can read independently, sometimes the reality of that, depending on your kids, is really difficult. And my oldest son has an attention span that could just go on for hours. I mean, I could never stop reading, and he could listen. My second son is extremely visual.
Okay.
And so he could not, and I can relate to this because I remember struggling when my mom would read aloud to us as kids. But if he can't see the words, he can't focus on them.
Interesting. Okay.
And so he did not enjoy read alouds until he was old enough to read for himself, and he could sit next to me, and he would constantly say, "Where are you? Where are you?" And he would want me to run my finger along the page where I was reading aloud.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
And so he enjoyed picture books, when he was younger, but as far as the longer chapter books, he needed to be able to read aloud or read along with me. And then my younger son has very little attention span, and his mouth never stops moving.
That sounds like me.
So it was this constant interruption and he'd just want to talk, or he would just slip away and go do his own thing.
Yeah.
And then the baby came along, the toddler.
And she's a little spitfire, right?
Oh my goodness, she's a spitfire, and she wants to be included, but she is not a sit still, be quiet little person. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times it felt like Read Aloud was this big battle time between either being interrupted constantly or feel like I was disciplining constantly.
Yeah.
You can't jump on me. You can't interrupt. You have to sit here. You have to be quiet. So I can relate to parents who struggle with Read Aloud time. Plus, I had kids who read early and inhale books.
Okay.
And so they'd also lose patience with, I just want to read that, and the whole stretching books out for a longer period of time, which is actually quite beneficial, is still difficult on the patience.
Oh, yeah, because reading aloud a book takes so much longer than reading a book to yourself. Hours and hours and hours longer to read something aloud. Yeah.
Right, and then plus you don't do it, you can only read aloud for so long in one stretch.
Yes. Yeah, my oldest 3, I used to be able to read aloud to them. We would really read aloud for maybe 3 hours a day, 2-3 hours. It was insane. We'd read everything. And then now I've got 3 more babies. One's a 2-year-old, and she's actually fairly cooperative now, but our 1-year-old twins are mobile, and
Yes, I do. So I didn't have twins, so I can't even imagine. I love the picture on your blog of the twins pulling the books off the shelves, because I could relate to that. That's what my whole house looks like, is everything pulled off shelves and dumped out of drawers. And since books are, I want books accessible to my kids at all times. That's usually what's all over every surface.
Yeah. Right. It's like it's not just like home decor, nice to look at, but it's actually a part of your culture. So you really want it to just be everywhere. I know I have a friend who told me I should put all the books in our house in one room. And I thought, well, no, I want books in every room. But books in every room means that what the toddlers were doing in that picture happens all over my house every day.
Yes. And I decided early on, because I was the kid, I was talking about what I was like in second grade, but even, right after that, I was the one who had this special library closet, and I wanted a Dewey Decimal System. I made up my own organizational system and logged in all the books and had them in specific categories and order. That's the kind of person I was, but my children are nothing like that. And I mean nothing like that.
Yeah.
But I made the decision early on that I want these books to be loved. And perfect on a shelf does nothing.
That's right.
And so all of our books look extraordinarily well loved.
Right. Which is what they're for, right?
Exactly.
On episode 8, Lawrence Goldstone came onto the podcast to talk about his book, Deconstructing Penguins, and to share about how to start a parent-child book group, which was a really great podcast. I loved that book. And you've actually done that in your community. So I want to hear all about your Book Detectives group. Can you tell us about that?
I would love to tell you about it, because it's been such a fun experience. Several years ago, I read Deconstructing Penguins, and I was completely inspired. And my sister read it right after I did, and she said, I want to do that. I want to do that with our kids. But I felt really inadequate to that task. I loved reading the discussions in the books that he had with the students, but half the time I was thinking I would have never thought of that question. I would have never thought of bringing that up, or I never saw that in the book. Yeah. And my education, I had no literary analysis growing up during my school years, and I don't understand how that happened. But so I felt inadequate. I didn't know how to go about discussing any book that wasn't specifically listed in Deconstructing Penguins. So about 3 years ago, I was introduced to Teaching the Classics by Adam Andrews, and I loved listening to that podcast that you did with him.
Oh, yes. For our listeners, that is episode 2, if you're looking for that one. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I watched the videos and had discussion, and I had a couple experiences with Teaching the Classics right in a row one summer. And finally, I was so excited that I had found a tool that could be applied to any piece of literature, from picture books to Tolstoy or Dickens.
Yeah.
And I needed that tool. And if you haven't looked at the Teaching the Classics syllabus, the Socratic list of questions that apply to any piece of literature in the back of the book is worth the price alone. There's 10 pages of questions.
I agree.
Of open-ended questions that can be applied to any piece of literature. And so once I had that tool, I thought, I have something to use to lead a book club. So I invited, there were probably about 10 parents and 12 kids in the beginning. And when I invited them, I said, we're going to be detectives, because we talked about the idea that books were mystery, that stories were mysteries, and that we were trying to look at the clues of the surface mystery of the plot and the things going on in the book to discover the deeper mystery, which is what the author was telling us about.
Okay.
Or wanting the theme, the idea that the author wanted to get across.
I bet the kids loved that. I mean, what kid doesn't want to be a detective, right? So,
well, it was really fun because we really talked up the ideas of being a detective. And in fact, I got little magnifying glasses at the dollar store and passed out magnifying glasses to each of the kids. And we had a couple older siblings dressed up as detectives.
Oh, how fun.
With hats and trench coats. And so we really played that up. And the kids were probably at that point between ages 5 and 10. So we had a fairly large, wide mix. We were trying to do mostly grade school, though.
Okay.
And we started out reading picture books at the meeting, and then we'd talk about them. And we'd use the story chart from Teaching the Classics.
Okay.
And we went through we talked about the setting being the crime scene, and the questions are where and when.
Okay.
And then we talked about the characters being the suspects. So we talked about who was in the story. And then the kids love the story chart with the bubbles in the kind of triangle shape.
Yes, and if our listeners want to see something like this, I will be linking in the show notes to Heidi's Book Detectives Group blog post, and she has a lot of great pictures that show. Actually, I think after every one of your posts that you talk about your meetings, you've posted a picture of what the whiteboard looks like when you guys are done with that triangular shaped bubble, right?
Yes, and the only thing I'll say is that usually I rewrote the notes, because I will not pretend that the notes looked that neat in the middle, because we were kind of writing down just as we were going and talking about it. So usually pretty messy, but that gives the pictures give a really good idea of what the board, the things that we wrote down on the board as notes.
Yeah.
And it helps for elementary students, again, the visual representation of that, because they could see, as we were discussing, they could see how that looked on the story chart.
Yeah, and I like how you started with picture books, even though your kids were, listening to or reading on their own longer chapter books. It's just like Adam Andrews says, that this is the way that you analyze any piece of literature, whether it's a picture book or, War and Peace. And so it's so helpful to do it with a picture book, to simplify it and get that kind of very simplified version, get into the habit, I guess, right?
Right. And the interesting things that came up is that all of the kids loved hearing the picture book read aloud at the meeting. And in fact, we started with picture books, and then in the middle we did some chapter books and had the kids read them and come. But it turned out that everybody enjoyed the picture books so much, even the older kids, that we went back to the picture books for the last few book club meetings that we've had. But the other interesting thing is that I chose picture books that I had read. A lot of them I had read over and over again, but I can't even express to you how much more I learned and noticed in these simple picture books when we discussed it as a group with the kids, with the moms that were there.
Okay.
I learned so much about the flow of a story, and I also learned how intentional authors are, even in simple chapter books. Everything, the illustrations and the way the author weaves the story, I didn't realize I mean, I just enjoyed them before, but I didn't realize how intentional and how deep even those simple stories could be.
Interesting. Yeah, Lawrence did say that on the podcast on episode 8. He said every single part of a story is there for a reason. And I thought, I bet that will uncover a whole new dimension that I've never noticed before, just knowing that.
Well, we did Miss Rumphius. I don't have it in the notes on my blog, but we did Miss Rumphius, and it's one that I've read over and over again. But I had 20 aha moments when we were discussing that, and I couldn't even believe the things that we could discuss from that simple picture book. So
really? Okay.
And I think all of the parents have felt that way. The moms tend to let the kids answer questions as often as possible because they want them, they don't want to take over the book club, but the moms still chime in, especially when the kids are having difficulty and or if the moms see something. And so it's been really fun to do that as a group, and not just with kids, but with the parents also.
So how many kids are in your group?
It's changed a little bit, and now that we're doing individual picture books, because it's hard for everybody's schedules to mesh up perfectly, and so it really varies depending on the month.
Okay.
But I'd say we probably have usually at least 6 moms and 10 kids.
Okay. Of what ages?
We're now probably between 6 and 12.
Okay. So if you were giving a mom, if a mom was going, I want to do this, what ages do you think are the youngest you could start? Or, what would your advice to her as far as the number of kids and the ages?
It kind of depends on the kid, of course, because some could do it earlier. But I felt like around age 6 is when they could start participating and really understanding what we were going for. And also it takes some level of being able to, not that, and my kids are certainly the least perfect among the sitting still and being quiet sort of atmosphere, but they have to be able to pay attention long enough and participate. So I think age 6 is a good place to start if you're doing picture books.
Okay, and you have all different ages in there. So how does that dynamic work with your older son is 12, is that right?
My older son is 12, but he's very imaginative.
Okay.
And he enjoys enjoys picture books, and he enjoys any kind of story. And so personality-wise, he's a good fit for that group. But I know in other groups you might have kids that are ready to do something a little bit more grown up by age 10 or 11.
Although I think, your comment about how much you've learned, it probably just feeds the experience to have all these different ages and their different perspectives, and they probably add something new and better, different, right?
Right, because a 12-year-old might see something different in a picture book than a 6-year-old would, but they get to share their ideas and hear the perspective from different ages.
Okay, very cool.
And I was going to mention also, we did the picture books, and we did the story chart using the ideas from Deconstructing Penguins about the mystery of a story. But then we decided to pull in something a little bit different a few months ago, and we actually did some of the questions from The Lost Tools of Writing by Circe.
Oh,
Institute.
Excellent. Yes.
And they have an invention process, which is essentially you're learning to think through a book and think through the ideas of a book and ask questions to essentially make a big inventory of things that you could write about.
Okay.
And so we started learning, and I do have one of those on my blog, at least one, to give you an idea of the questions that we asked. But we started out just asking the kids, say, what questions can you ask about the story? And then we said, could we change any of these questions into should questions? And Andrew Kern has talked a lot about that. Should a certain character have done a certain action?
Yes.
Is a great way to open up ideas inside of a story.
Actually, I think there's an audio, a talk he gave on teaching the literature without killing the book or the student or something like that. I'm getting the title mixed up now, but I'll find it and I'll link it in the show notes because I'm a huge Andrew Kern junkie myself, but that's just such a great talk, and he has so much wisdom in there. So on the should question is something that he really addresses in that particular talk.
Right, and that was a really fun thing because the kids came up with interesting should questions. They'd pick a character and an action and say, should they have done that? And so we changed the questions that we had asked, and we decided which ones could be changed into should questions, and then we voted on which should question we wanted to really talk about. And you can hand kids a should question. You can come up with that on your own. You could say, okay, we're going to talk about should this character have done this action. But it was kind of fun for them to come up with questions on their own and then feel like they got a say in voting for which should question we were going to discuss. So we set up our Annie chart, and that the Lost Tools of Writing goes into that at the beginning of the program. But you make a chart, and you have 3 columns, and in the first column you have an A, which stands for affirmative, and all the reasons for why the character should have done an action would go in that column. And then the middle column has an N at the top for negative, and all the reasons why a character should not have done the action would go in that column. And then the third column has an I at the top for interesting, and anything that comes up that is not specifically affirmative or negative goes in the I for interesting column. And as you can imagine, when you have a bunch of elementary students talking, there were a lot of things to put in the interesting category, but it was a way to validate that they were participating and what they had to say was important.
Right. And there's not a right or wrong where they're intimidated to say anything because they're not sure what the right answer is or what exactly you're looking for.
Exactly. And that's another thing that we found in this in the book club setting was that kids were just encouraged to share what they knew, what they thought, and there are no wrong answers.
Right.
And so they're getting in this culture of participating and sharing and not scared that they're going to have the wrong answer or say the wrong thing.
Right.
So the Annie chart, we filled it up and came up with lots of reasons for both the affirmative and negative, and that's pretty much as far as we took it because you can go further, but it's really better for upper middle school or high school, but it was just a way to get kids learning how to ask questions and coming up with ideas from a story.
I went to the 2 Andrews talk where Andrew Kern and Andrew Pudewa were speaking, and Andrew Kern walked us through that Annie system with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Actually, I think I may have gone to the same tour that you went to, one in Oregon. Ours was in Washington. You went to the 2 Andrews talk, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
When they were in Oregon, and it was fantastic. It was so much fun.
Yes,
I
was really blown away by that simple should question that Andrew Kern walked us through. Should Edmund have followed the White Witch in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? And it really just blew me away. How he didn't know where the conversation was really going to go. I mean, he didn't really know the journey it was going to take, but he was talking about how it always ends in truth, no matter what. If you ask a should question and you follow this sort of Annie framework, the affirmative, the negative, the interesting, and kind of walk through those steps, it always leads you to the truth. So it's just, I was blown away by that and thought, okay, I need to have more of this. So I love how you've woven the Lost Tools of Writing in with teaching the classics and this book detective or deconstructing penguins methods to create your own book detective group that really meets your kids where they're at. That's so awesome.
Yes, and it's been a great combination because they each have something a little bit different that went together really well. And I like what you said about Andrew Kern not knowing where the conversation was going to go, because I learned a few meetings in that it was almost more fun if I just picked a book and I didn't go through it ahead of time and analyze it in my own head.
Okay.
That I just took a book that I had enjoyed previously, but then I read it and we discussed it together, because then I didn't have a specific direction I wanted to force the conversation to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In the audio Teaching Literature Without Killing the Book or the Student that I'll link in the show notes, Andrew Kern does that as well. He gives an example of what it looks like to talk about a book where the teacher knows exactly the path that she wants the kids to go on, versus talking about a book where you don't really know where it's going to go, but you ask a few key questions, the should question being central to that. And it was astounding how much deeper and more meaningful the conversation that he really didn't prepare a whole lot for. And he was talking about how the second way, without having the clear path, but just having a few key questions, that one takes so much less time to prepare for in advance, but offers a much more meaningful outcome. So that was really interesting to me.
That's true. And that's really helpful when, we as moms are trying to juggle 50 different things, that we don't have to have this perfect plan with these little blanks and worksheets and, these specific answers, that it's more of a conversation and a relationship. And then it's easier to pull into everyday life as well.
Yeah, so when you don't have a book club meeting and you're not doing the official, let's chart this out on paper and look at how the plot structure, what the author is trying to say to us through the plot structure or whatnot, you could ask a simple should question on your ride to swim practice or on your way to the soccer game about a book that your child's reading that you've read before, or a book that you've read you're reading together. And it could just be, it becomes more like a way of life, and it doesn't have to be this big addition to our to-do list or a big pressure of, we're so overwhelmed as moms anyway, I think, with all these things we need to do. So this makes it a way where we can talk about books in a meaningful way that is just a part of our culture, a part of our family life, and it doesn't add to the strain of what we're already trying to do.
Absolutely. And I think we're also teaching kids how to ask questions. Essentially, we're training ourselves how to think and how to ask questions. But I loved it. Last night, I was reading The Little White Horse by Elizabeth Goudge to the kids. And at the beginning, it's talking about the characters are in a carriage that's lurching along this pathway. And my middle son immediately piped up and he said, that's a clue as to the time period that it's set in.
Ah, yes, right.
Because they're in a carriage, so we know that that's probably before cars. And so he's catching details that mean something in the story that he would have just passed by otherwise.
And Adam Andrews says that. He says the more often we do this, the more it just becomes a habit. And so that the biggest part is that if you can do meaningful conversations, these intentional book detectives type of scenarios occasionally, just a couple of times, that will train your child to do it on their own, just become a habit of mind. And so that's what your son was doing, is just sort of, asking those questions without having to have the formal class. It just becomes a part of the way that they interact with books.
Right, and having also the book detectives set up for once a month or whenever you do it, it's more of a fun atmosphere to discuss that, and it's not one child that's having to answer all the questions, because that's something I think we forget at home when if we're homeschooling. Our poor child in front of us is the one who has to answer every single question.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
That comes up. We're in a group or a classroom setting. Everybody's kind of taking turns and listening to other kids' ideas. So it's a very relaxed, fun, just an enjoyable setting to learn something that is kind of big ideas and that kids might think of as a difficult subject. And so it's not like we're doing this with every single book.
Right.
There's a lot of just sitting down and enjoying reading books and not having to analyze it. But they're getting these tools in a more fun setting that they can use at other times.
Well, and then I guess, do you find then, since you organize these with other families, that it happens more reliably because it's on your calendar and it involves other people, and so it can, you're planning ahead for this event, kind of this, gathering?
I am a big deadline person. Things don't tend to happen unless they're specifically scheduled and there's a deadline of some sort. So that's very true. I would be much less likely to have these kinds of discussions if we weren't doing it with a book club and have that sort of accountability.
Well, I could see how that could be pretty fun if you had a group of, 4 or 5 moms and rotated whose house it was done at, and maybe there's some fun snacks, and it's something that the kids look forward to once every month or every other month or something. I could see how that would be just a really, really fun habit to get into as a family.
And you can take it as far as you want, because my friend Hannah, when they did their book detectives meetings, they had crafts and food and all sorts of things that were in the theme of the book.
Yeah.
And I'm not so much of that sort of planner craft person.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And so ours were really relaxed. I'd pick the book right before the meeting. We sat down. I'd read the book aloud. We'd discuss it, and the kids would go play, and the moms would have chat time. And so it was really simple. So you can kind of take that either direction.
Awesome. Yeah, I will link. I believe I linked to her before, but Hannah's blog is Here in the Lovely Woods, and I will make sure I link to her blog in the show notes as well, because she has some good notes on her group.
Yes.
So what's your big advice to moms who are eager to start a book detectives group of their own?
I think the biggest thing is not to be intimidated and be willing to learn with the kids and understand that I think sometimes as adults we expect when we're learning something new to be immediately at this proficient adult level.
Right.
And we don't give ourselves permission to start at, in classical education, what would be the grammar stage level of a new subject. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when things are new, be willing to start at the beginning and start and learn with your kids. I think that's the biggest thing. And then just sit back and enjoy the conversation and know that not every little thing has to be planned out.
Yeah, that's perfect. If you were stranded on an island, I asked this question. I asked this question to Melissa Wiley, and I think I almost gave her a heart attack. But if you were stranded on an island with your family and could only bring 3 books, what would they be?
Oh, my goodness. That is, and as much as I love lists, and I've done this several times on my blog, like what are the 5 most important books for your kids to read growing up and that sort of thing. But then, of course, as soon as I have to answer it, it's like induces a heart attack. Other than the Bible, I think that if I were stranded on an island, I would want a book full of fairy tales.
Okay.
I think maybe like Andrew Lang's the fairy books.
Uh-huh.
And let's see, and maybe a poetry or Shakespeare anthology. We've been memorizing a lot of Shakespeare and poetry with the kids.
Yep.
And so I think that gives back, there's a lot more to involve yourself with if you were going to have a long period of time. And I'll go with Watership Down.
Watership Down. Man, it's been a long time since I've read that.
I didn't read it as a child, and I read it as an adult, and I could not believe how much I loved the story.
Really?
I was so surprised that I would enjoy a story about rabbits.
Interesting. I haven't read it since high school, and I don't think I appreciated it at the time, so maybe I need to reread it again.
Well, and maybe I wouldn't have appreciated it in high school, because I know there's lots of books that I read the first time and didn't care for at all. But as an adult, I loved Watership Down. I actually read it for another book club of mine, so it was all adults reading the story.
Oh, wow.
And in general, everyone was just amazed at how much they enjoyed the story. Huh. And then I recently read it aloud to the kids, and it's probably one of our favorite read-alouds.
Wow, okay. Very good. Were all your kids interested, all the ages?
My youngest, my 3-year-old definitely not. And my 7-year-old, he was 7, or he's almost 8, I guess, but he doesn't concentrate very well on larger stories, so he'd listen to parts and pieces, but my older 2 at 12 and then 9 loved it.
Okay. And where do you go then for book recommendations? Everybody goes to you, so where do you go?
Well, I already mentioned The Well-Trained Mind and Honey for a Child's Heart, which are great resources. There's a 1,000 good books list online that is, I think it's a classical homeschooling list, but it's an incredible list that's broken down into reading levels and anthologies and poetry and various, but it's called the 1,000 Good Books list.
Yep, I'll link that up.
And I do a lot of searching on Amazon and reading reviews and seeing related books.
Okay.
Veritas Press and also Sunlight, I've actually liked a lot of their book selections.
Okay.
I've gotten many books from both of those companies. The two blogs or online sources that I love are The Rabbit Room.
The Rabbit Room. I haven't heard of that one.
And Story Warren.
Story Warren. Okay.
They
I'll
are
look those
both
up.
absolutely fantastic. I think The Rabbit Room is possibly Andrew Peterson's blog. He wrote the Wing Feather Saga.
Oh, Tish talked about that in our episode too. Her daughter was really liking the Wing Feather Saga.
Yes, my kids read the first three and were just waiting on pins and needles, begging me for the fourth book, and it just came and they devoured it.
Okay.
So
I haven't gotten my hands on it yet. I guess I need to.
yeah. So those are two blogs, and also Exodus books.
Okay.
There's a lot of great reviews on Exodus books. They're homeschooling, literature-based company. They sell literature.
I refer to Sunlight a lot as well. I know you mentioned them. I love how they give a recommended age for reading alone and a recommended age for reading aloud, because I think that's a really helpful distinction.
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, that is super wonderful. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
You were talking about the difference between reading alone and reading aloud, and I wanted to mention two of my favorite authors that have an amazing vocabulary, an amazing way with words, and can be enjoyed by really young kids, but they make great read-alouds because the vocabulary is so sophisticated.
Okay.
And that's William Steig, or Steg,
yes.
I'm not sure how you pronounce. But he wrote Amos and Boris and Brave Irene and Dr. DeSoto.
Yep.
Is one book that he's famous for. But the vocabulary in his picture books are fantastic. But a lot of people don't realize that he wrote 3 short chapter books.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
And again, if you have a strong reader, they can read it independently because they are shorter they're shorter chapter books, but the vocabulary is very sophisticated. So that's Abel's Island.
Okay.
The Real Thief.
Okay.
And Dominic are his 3 chapter books that he's written, and I would highly recommend those.
Oh, excellent. I've never even heard of those. I am, of course, familiar with Brave Irene and Amos and Boris and Dr. DeSoto, but I didn't know he wrote chapter books. Okay.
Right, and we did The Real Thief for one of our book detectives, and it was one of my favorite book detectives meetings.
Okay. Do you have a post on that one?
I do.
You do? Okay.
I do. And then also James Thurber.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of him, but he wrote the picture book Many Moons.
No, I don't think I have heard of him. Okay, James Thurber,
and again,
Many Moons.
Yes, and again, you can tell that he absolutely has a love affair with words.
Okay, oh, love. Okay.
It's just fantastic. But he also wrote 2 short chapter books that are a little bit edgy, for kids that are super sensitive. They're kind of a little bit darker.
Okay.
But they're absolutely fantastic books. The 13 Clocks and The Wonderful O.
The Wonderful O. I think maybe I have heard of the 13 Clocks, but I can't think of it. It sounds familiar.
But again, those make great read-alouds because they're written for children, but they have very sophisticated vocabulary, and you can tell that the authors love words.
That makes a huge difference, I think, when you're reading aloud and it just has some really fantastic, delicious words. It just makes a huge difference in the read aloud experience, I think.
Yes, it does.
Very good. Well, where can our listeners find you online?
I am at Mount Hope Chronicles. Mount Hope Chronicles is the title of my blog, but the address is Mount Hope Academy. So MTHOPEACADEMY readaloud.blogspot.com.
Perfect. And you have some great categories on your site, Picture Book Picnic and the Book Detectives Group and the Reading Child. So I will link to all those different categories so our listeners can find your recommendations and your blog posts. Again, if you're interested in the Book Detectives group, definitely check out her Book Detectives post because she's got excellent visuals, walks you right through some of her meetings, good suggestions for the books that they've used and enjoyed. And then the whiteboard pictures are really, really invaluable. If you want to get a handle, if you're a visual person like me and you want to get a good handle on what that actually looks like, you can get it there. So thank you so much for joining me. This has been a ton of fun.
Thanks, Sarah. I love chatting with books, and it was a fun time chatting with you.
Now it's time for Let the Kids Speak. This is my favorite part of the podcast, where kids tell us about their favorite stories that have been read aloud to them.
My name is Simon, and I'm 5 years old. I'm from Florida, and my favorite book is this that my mom and daddy read to me is the Jesus Storybook Bible. My favorite part is when Jesus rises again.
That's my favorite part too. Hey, your child can be on an upcoming episode. All you need to do is head to readaloudrevival.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click the big orange button to leave me a voicemail. You can coach or prompt your young kids right through it. I can edit on my end and cut out your adult voice if I need to. So really, there's no pressure for your child to record a perfect message or anything. You can say, you can figure out together what your child wants to say, and then have them echo you right on the message, and I can fix it up to come on the podcast. It's so great to hear from the kids about what they love being read to them, so keep those messages coming. Don't forget to take my survey for your chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card, as long as you are listening to this episode before September 15th, 2014. You can do that at readaloudrevival.com. The feedback I've gotten already has been crazy helpful and will help me get great guests and topics coming up on future episodes. That's it for today. Until next time, friends, go build your family culture around books.